Hello everyone and welcome back to the 2020 Tata Steel Masters edition. It's round 11 and Firouzja had some very strong opponents in the previous two rounds. Well, he had very strong opponents in all the rounds, but in the previous two rounds he faced Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana, so the World Champion and the World Championship Challenger from 2018, and now he faces another former World Champion, Viswanathan Anand, that's some streak. Imagine playing those three in a row. That being said, let's check out how he fared against Vichy. So Firouzja opens with d4. We have knight f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, and Anand goes for the Nimzo-Indian defense. We have bishop to b4. We have f3, the Kmoch variation of the Nimzo-Indian, and now d5 by Anand. We have a3, pushing the bishop back, or asking maybe we would like to capture. So bishop goes back to e7, even though captures is the most played line. So Anand goes back, bishop e7, and now e4. We have d captures on e4, f captures on e4, and c5 by Anand. And here it's a fairly standard line. d5 is the main move here, which makes sense. You want to grab space in the center, but Alireza plays e5, and it's a move that has been played only once by Peter Leko. Sorry, not by Peter Leko, by Evgeny Nair against Peter Leko. So an interesting idea, and well, maybe Anand is not familiar with it since it was only played once so far. We have knight f to d7, and d captures on c5. We have knight captures on e5 by Anand, and now an early queen trade. Queen captures, bishop captures, and bishop to e2. And here, knight b to d7 is what Peter Leko played in the 2019 Grand Swiss, FIDE Grand Swiss. That game ended in a draw against Evgeny Nair, but here we have bishop to d7 by Anand, and it is as of move 11 that we have a completely new game. So Alireza continues to develop knight f3. We have knight captures on f3, bishop captures on f3, now puts pressure on b7, and Anand blocks with bishop to c6. Now Alireza does have a double c pawn here, but he's hoping to get b4 and b5 in, and should be a plus for him. We have knight to e4 now, blocking, getting the knight to a much nicer square. Knight to d6 check also is an idea. Bishop to c7, and now b4 as planned. We have knight to d7 by Anand, now saying that, okay, if you go with b5, then I can just captures, and knight captures on c5, attacks the bishop, also guards the b7 pawn. So after knight to d7, we have bishop to b2, putting pressure on the g7 pawn, and now Anand blocks with knight to e5. And also puts pressure on c4, and you can capture the bishop at will. However, you will expose your g7 pawn if you do that. Here, Alireza castles queenside, and Anand captures the bishop. We have bishop captures on f3, g captures, and now bishop to f4 with check. And this is a very useful check for many reasons, but the most important one being after king to b1 and f6, not allowing this captures. We have rook h to g1 by Alireza going after g7. And here Anand can now play king to f7. And now, due to the bishop to f4 check and the king being moved to b1, now you cannot push b5, because here, after bishop captures on e4, it comes with check. If this didn't come with check, if the king was still on c1, then white would have this very nice in-between rook to d7 check, and then after rook captures on g7, you basically resign here. But now, with this being a check, now you would have the capture, and then rook a8 does not allow this very nice rook lift for Alireza. So here, after king to f7, Alireza goes knight to d6 with check. We have bishop captures, and now, unfortunately, you cannot play c captures and unpin because you lose the f3 pawn, and then you will have some problems guarding against these four gentlemen here. Your rook is under attack, rook moves, now rook h to d8 is coming, and black is just excellent here. Plus, you just grabbed a very important pawn. So, after bishop captures on d6, we have rook captures on d6, and then now comes g5 by Anand. No longer you have to worry about the g7 pawn, and the bishop nicely covers the d7 square. The f3 pawn is still under attack, so you have to play a bit of a passive move, rook to f1 to defend it, and then now a6, preventing b5, of course. We have king to c2. Alireza wants to bring the king to e3, maybe even further in the future. Rook h to d8 now. Preparing a nice rook trade. We have king to d2. There's no way to take advantage of this weird position of the king, so the king is just on his way to e3. And then now e5. Making the way for the king. Anand's plan is to capture here, allow this fixing of the pawn structure, but it will get the king to e6, which is very important. From e6 you will guard the e5 pawn, so you can maybe continue pushing with f5 and so on. So king e3 by Alireza, and now rook captures on d6. Yes, this does fix your pawn structure, but it also allows the activation of the king. We have king to e6 and now c5. So now this is a very interesting position. Black is better, but why is black better? That's the question. So what would you play here? Feel free to pause the video for a minute or maybe even two, and soak in the position. What would you play here? Well, I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations for being an excellent finder of plans in an endgame. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, viable options are either a5, you want to break open this pawn chain, rook to g8 is an idea, followed by g4, or even maybe a nice rook maneuver all the way to h3. But b6 is best. This is what Anand plays, and it will either, if you allow captures, get a nice open b file for the black rook, or if you don't, you just constantly have to worry about it. So here, Alireza played h4. He wants to try and get an open file for his rook on the king side. Anand plays h6. We have h captures, and now c captures on b6. Like I said, if you don't want to capture this, if you want to play something like rook d1, put a rook behind a passed pawn, then Anand will capture and play rook to b8. And then now with the rook coming to b3, it's just a very strong position for black. So here, instead, Alireza decides for c captures here. And then now rook to b8, going after the pawns here. You could also capture on d6, however, then you allow rook to d1 check, and then white gets a nice rook on his open file. And in the future, also the b6 pawn might become an issue. So instead, after c captures on b6, we have rook to b8 by Anand. And then now rook to d1, putting the rook behind a passed pawn, also defending it, but Anand is not worried. It seems like it was more natural to capture this pawn here, but Anand has a different plan. And he knows, since white has a dark square bishop, that he's never crossing this light square. It doesn't matter what Alireza does here. So even though if it appears to be a very strong passed pawn, you are never crossing the light square here. And also Alireza is 3 minutes on the clock, so by not capturing, you're actually forcing him to burn more time. And it's only move 32, so Alireza still needs to make 8 more moves to reach time control, whereas Anand has some 26 minutes. So rook captures on b6 first, king f2. We have bishop to a4, taking some very important squares from the white rook, and now this is Anand's point. Now if you go rook c1 to grab hold of the open c file, then you lose this pawn, and then it's you are down a pawn, and when this pawn mass starts marching forward, it will be very hard to defend. So here, rook to d2 was played by Alireza, and now comes rook to b8. Now Anand will try to shift the rook to the other side of the board, and it's hard to make a move for Alireza. You cannot move the rook from the defense of this pawn here. The bishop really doesn't have a good thing to do, and you can just play a move with the king. So it's what Alireza does. King g3. We have rook to c8 now by Anand, and now king back to f2. Still Alireza without a viable plan. We have rook to c4, and probably with the idea of either trying a5 or maybe going just all the way to the king side with rook to h4. But king to g3 by Alireza, and now rook back to c8 by Anand. He's now deciding that shifting the rook over via the king side is better. King f2, we have rook to h8, and now king to g3. We have rook to h1. You cannot prevent rook h3 or h1, both at the same time. So king g2, and now rook to b1, putting pressure on the bishop. King g3, just repeating moves, and now bishop to c6. Now Anand wants to play rook f1 and put pressure on the f3 pawn here. King f2, not allowing this, but now king d7. Again, asking Alireza, what's your move? If you move the rook, then I capture the pawn here. If you move the bishop anywhere, I get rook b3 in, and then, well, your a3 pawn is gone. So king g3 is played, and now rook to f1, going after the pawn, and now rook d3. I forgot to mention this already, move 44, so time control has been reached, so Alireza gained more time. Here he does have a lot of time he can use to calculate. So here, there is this e4 move. e4 is a very forcing line. Point being that after captures and captures, the rook is under attack, rook to d2. Now you start pushing your pawns here, and it's, again, very hard to find a move. Bishop e5 if you want to activate your rook, so the pawn is defended, but now rook f3 check. King to h2 or somewhere, and now, for example, rook captures on a3, or if you don't capture, or if you don't play bishop to e5, you have to keep it here, but then your rook is paralyzed, so there's no way to keep an eye on d6 pawn and the a3 pawn. But again, this is something Alireza would perfectly calculate, so Anand doesn't want to give him that. Anand plays king to e6 and just tells him, you don't have a move here. And indeed, Alireza does not have a move here. The engine stop recommendation here is rook to c3, just wasting a move, but attacking the bishop, but then bishop d5, and the next move you are going to pick up the d6 pawn, and then it's just, you take it from there. So Alireza not ready to part with his pawn. After king to e6, he goes king to g4 instead. But now Anand has rook to b1, he attacks the bishop. If you move the bishop, like I said, rook c3, then you get rook b3, you go after the pawn. So rook to d2, defending, and now rook to g1 with check. Point being, you have to move away from the defense of the pawn. King to h3 is played, and now what do you play here? Do you capture the pawn or do you not capture the pawn? Let's say you capture the pawn. I'm just going to tell you it's a terrible move, but you have to figure out why it's a terrible move. So feel free to pause the video and try to figure out why this doesn't work. While I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting excellent tactics in an opposite color bishop endgame. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, for those of you who found the d7, that's not the reason. If you found d7, then g4 will be deadly. Because after g4 check, you have to move the king. You can't go up the board because, well, g5, you do not have g5. So you have to go back, king h2, now rook h1 check, king g3, rook h3 check, king f2, and now rook h2 check. King e3, and now rook captures, and you guard the queening square, so the rook has to be captured, but now you pick up the pawn. And now you are 4 pawns to 2 pawns, of course completely winning for black. So after bishop captures on f3, the reason why it doesn't work is actually bishop captures on e5. So congratulations to all of you who found that. Now the point is, if the king captures, now you really do have d7. So you have to capture with the pawn, and now d7. And now the same line only results in a draw. g4 check, but now you have access to h4 because there is no pawn on f6 preventing the king from reaching g5. So now rook h1 check, king g5, and now there's nothing better than to give up the rook. Once the pawn queens, captures, and now you will most likely draw this, as you do have a nice pass pawn, g3, rook c8, you're going to go g2, rook to c1, and now the rook guards the queening square, but it's very unlikely that you will be able to get more than a draw, because you constantly have to keep an eye on the pawns here, and even after you get a passed pawn here, the bishop nicely covers here, so it's not a problem. But yeah, after this king to h3 move, bishop captures wouldn't be all that great for Anand. So here, instead of capturing, Anand played rook to f1, and it was in this position that Alireza Firouzja resigned, as he feels like there's nothing more to be done here. And there, in fact, there isn't. Because whatever you do, you are never crossing the light square, so there's that. And, well, now you're going to lose the pawn. There's a double attack on the pawn. There's no way to defend it. There's nothing you can do here. You could try going for rook d3 and trying something like rook captures with check, rook captures, bishop captures to go into an opposite color bishop endgame, but it doesn't really work because, well, you will lose this pawn as well, and then it's just 4 pawns against 2. That's no way to try and hold a draw. But yeah, so after rook to f1, Alireza resigned, and an excellent win for Viswanathan Anand and a beautifully played endgame. So so far, Alireza was leading the tournament. He had some some excellent wins, but when it comes to facing the absolute top elite of the chess world, he still struggles a bit. Not so much, he doesn't miss anything, it's just that he's still not there. So far, the games he lost is against Wesley So, a current World Fisher Random Champion, Magnus Carlsen, who's the World Champion, Fabiano Corona, the former World Chess Championship challenger, and Vishwanathan Anand, former World Champion. So those are the beasts that he still cannot tame. But yeah, we'll see. It will be very exciting to see how strong this tournament will make Alireza and where he will take it from there. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. We're going to cover at least one more game from 11th round of the 2020 Tata Steel, and then we're going to check out the standings. Probably tomorrow. I would like to thank Boguslav Prančke, Florian Bone, Giovanni Russo, Simon Johansson, and Steven Valente for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing the coverage of the Tata Steel, of course, checking up on the Women's World Chess Championship. We have to check out what happened in the tie breaks. Checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and when I catch a break, continuing the Morphy saga, of course. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Friday.